到场的来宾这么多，可是我觉得，这个并不是我觉得意外。看我们今天参加这个对话的2位专家，我们已经预料到了，对这个题目和对这2位专家的兴趣会很大的。会的主席 Bernhard Lorenz 先生致辞，bitte Herr Lorenz。
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, it's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you on behalf of the Stiftung Mercator, of our foundation, here to the second Salon. We had the first one yesterday of this new series of salons. You might know that we started this series 2 years ago, accompanying the exhibition The Art of Enlightenment with a program series discussing a dialogue on enlightenment. We had a series of salons which were very successful. More than 4,000 people were attending the salons, and we decided in the beginning of this year to continue this salon with the moderation of Michael Kahn-Ackermann, who's also the special representative of Stiftung Mercator here in China. You might ask, why is this German foundation doing such a series of programs here in Beijing? We truly invest into the relationships between China and Germany. We think that the exchange of people and the exchange of ideas is crucial for building bridges between both cultures and the people that live here. And thus we are very interested to open a platform with this salon to discuss issues of common interest. In the first phase, concerning issues surrounding the ideas of enlightenment, and now other issues like the role of metropolitan areas and the culture of metropolitan areas and the architecture and the role that architectures can play in these metropolitan areas. I welcome you warmly, I welcome this distinguished panel, and I'm happy that my colleague Michael Kahn-Ackermann will introduce the speakers now. I wish us a wonderful discussion. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
谢谢 Mr. Lorenz。我就首先想介绍一下今天参加我们的论坛的嘉宾。可是之前我就想介绍一下我们就是这种活动怎么举行。我们先请2位嘉宾谈5分钟，他们觉得最重要的马上想谈的一些问题，然后继续做一个对话。2位专家们，2位贵宾就是做对话，大概1个小时左右。1个小时之后，我们就给观众一个讨论和提问题的机会。好，我就先介绍一下2个嘉宾。在右边的是 David Gianotten。Mr. Gianotten 先生是荷兰人，我刚刚才知道，因为他的姓又不是一个荷兰人，也不是一个英国人，所以我就是刚刚知道他爸爸是意大利人，可是他是在荷兰出生，在荷兰埃因托芬大学开始学建筑学，以后搬到德国去了，搬到日本去了。现在是可以说是在一个代表是一个建筑国际化的、全球化的象征性的公司工作。他在香港 OMA 公司做东亚OMA 东亚办事处的主任，全亚洲代表处。OMR 我们当然马上想起来 OMR 的创立者 Rem Koolhaas，可以这么说，就是 Gianotten 先生是 M. Koolhaas 在亚洲的代表。第二位嘉宾我几乎好像不要介绍，我估计相当就是大部分所在的人就知道他。假如说就是 OMA and M. Koolhaas 是全球化的建筑的象征，张永和在某些方面变成了一个中国建筑的象征。尽管你在 Berkeley 学了硕士了，可是最近几年他开了他的非常建筑公司之后，变成中国最有注目的、最有让人家注目的、最有影响的中国建筑设计家之一。张永和有一个特点，他不仅是一个建筑设计家。我们刚刚在中饭的时候讨论过，他在好多方面，在某些方面可以说是恢复德国包豪斯的传统，因为他不仅是一个建筑设计家，他也是设计服装、家居，还有什么？首饰，所以他是一个全部的设计家。我觉得他的自己的建筑设计跟这种对设计的全面的理解非常有关系。好，张永和，我先请你谈5分钟的你的一些你觉得最基本的要谈的问题。
Hello everyone, or Guten Tag. 今天我们3位坐在这儿呢，实际上是谈一个很重要的问题，就是不仅仅是城市，而且是巨型都市的问题。这个阿克曼先生呢，请我来呢，因为他知道我在城市问题上呢是个反动派。在过去的几十年里头呢，在美国有一个比较反动的这个城市运动，他们叫自己呢新城市主义 （New Urbanism）。我呢不同意他们，因为我感兴趣的呢是真正的老城市主义 （Old Urbanism）。所以简单的说呢，我的观点是这样子的。城市不管有可能有多大，一个人呢是生活在一个社区里面，是生活在一个小范围。当然这个英文呢有几个字儿，有2个字儿很重要，一个就是 community， 你还是住在一个 community 里面，你还是住在一个 neighborhood 啊，这2个字儿中文翻起来可能不是很容易翻译。那在这一点来说呢，如果是同意我的话，如果他可能要不同意，我也觉得很有意思。同意我的话呢，实际上对城市的尺度呢就有一个认识。整个的城市可以很大，可是社区的尺度呢一定是跟人呢是很有关系的。街道也不应该太宽呐，一个街区英文叫 block 也不应该很大，等等等等。所以一个理想的城市的社区呢，我认为还是应该是步行的。也许整个的城市是要靠公共交通轨道交通，和当然也不可避免的有一些那个私人拥有的汽车的交通等等。可是在社区里面呢是可以还是步行的，而且在这个社区里面的功能呢一定是混的，而不是单一的。也就是说，住、工作、消费、文化生活 社会这个交往呢，都可能在这个社区里发生。我之所以这么想呢，其实也并不是因为我是一个建筑师，我做城市设计我才这么想，因为我小时候长大的北京就是这样子，我是在王府井长大的，所以那个时候吃完晚饭，我父母带着我和我哥哥上街，就会碰到亲戚朋友打招呼，所以你觉得你不是住在一个当时我不知道应该有好几百万人，可是你觉得你是住在一个地方，你是跟别的人有联系的。那我因为工作的关系呢，我也经常去纽约，纽约可能也是一个如果不是大家最熟悉的一个超级城市，可是都是有那个这个很有这个社区的感觉。你住在一个地方哈，比方咱们是说这个是那个the East Village， 在纽约这个东村，你也有一些小饭馆啊，你走进去啊，也是碰到朋友啊，等等等等。我觉得这种生活比较人性，所以我作为一个建筑师，我设计的东西应该是我自己喜欢的。所以说起这种标志性建筑哈，英文叫 iconic buildings。有也挺好，我不认为它们那么重要。我呢一会儿有一个设计的案例呢，等后面的讨论如果需要的话我再放。那我就先说到这儿。
好，非常感谢，张永和。先请，yes, Mr. Gianotten, I would please your statement.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to discuss the topic today. I'm very happy you started with the community. Because I took the other angle to start with the megacity. Because this is an exchange between Europe and China. I thought it would become a very European and Chinese discussion. But actually when we talk about the megacity, it's not that anymore. Because most of the megacities are outside of Europe. Actually none of them is in Europe. So it's very interesting to take that point. But also the first megacity in China, which is Beijing, is only on the list of megacities number 13 in the world. So if you really discuss it from that perspective, it's not even that large of a city. Especially not because of in Asia, there's a lot of things going on. And a lot of the real megacities are there. So if you look at China, where you would expect many of them, the population growth is enormous, like 50% in about 20 years' time. But in areas where a lot of people don't expect it, for example, in Indonesia, it's even much larger. And since end of last year, actually Jakarta is the biggest city in the world. And that's the real megacity. It's even bigger than Tokyo at the moment. And a lot of questions that we might discuss today are relevant for it, because you say it should be a pedestrian city, public transport, for whom has been to Jakarta, and Jakarta has no public transport. So it's a very interesting how a megacity actually starts existing and what the reason of becoming a megacity actually is. Another very important thing to say when we talk about a megacity, we're actually talking about a city with a conglomerate around it. Every megacity, including Beijing, has a heart, and that's the real city. So if you talk to the citizens of that megacity, they refer to the city as the heart, and all the conglomerates around it make it that megacity. Here you see an image of Hanoi, which is one of the biggest conglomerates in the world. And you see that actually, if you calculate it or look at it carefully, there are about 23 real cities that grew together. In this context, we are now making city 24, so it's a very interesting context to work in. We are both architects or trained urban planners, but what is actually our influence, and what do we have to do? That's one of the questions that was asked in the introduction. Should we go for gentrification? Can we go for gentrification? Should we use models of the past for megacities of the future? Or should we be more spontaneous? Should we plan less? And should we try to avoid terms like beautiful and ugly? Because I think that's only an opinion, and it's only based on culture. It can never be everybody's opinion. So if you want to objectively look at a city, that's maybe not the best thing to do. Also, what is social success in a megacity? I think in a megacity, social success is already defined when you're part of the society. And you don't need to be rich in many of these cities to be part of the society. So it's also very interesting, for whom do we plan and what do we plan? And then immediately to kind of say something about our own profession. Actually, it's nice that you're all here. It's good on this Sunday afternoon in a rainy city. But architects are actually not influential at all, and especially not if we plan megacities. But because in an urban context, everything that is built, only 8% of it is seen by one of us or one of our colleagues. That means that 92% of what is around is actually spontaneous. And that might maybe trigger the question, should we really discuss planning? Or should we really discuss how a city should be organized? If in the end it organizes itself. And I think I would stop my introduction there, and you could maybe...
And in fact, I would refer to what you mentioned for your both question. Normal people like me, when they look on cities, especially these mega cities like Beijing or Hong Kong, they look on buildings. And for them, the city seems to be an agglomeration of high-rising, beautiful, huge buildings, iconic monuments, and so on. And you just said that, in fact, architecture doesn't really play an essential role in the development of megacities. So my question to you both, in that constellation of politics, commerce, people's need, and design, what is in fact the role of architecture? Chang Yung Ho, or I don't know who wants to answer first.
Okay. It's not an easy question to answer. First of all, I agree with David, especially sitting here with a principal from OMA. We have witnessed the power of an architect, meaning Mr. Ram Koolhaas, who I also know fairly well, in media. So if you read the newspapers in Holland, in China even, or magazines, you see Ram's quotations about city in probably quite a bit and so on. But in reality, as far as really the decision making within the process of urbanization, our role diminishes very fast. So I think that's reality, and I don't see how that's going to be changed. But I like to say that because an office like ours, we're totally out of the system, 体制外. I don't know what would be so we don't really get the jobs in the city. If I do, I have a very different idea about Beijing. For instance, I don't think the density in Beijing is high enough, although most people think it's too high. I think it's the other way around, and so on. But so we work like the Chinese communists before 1949. We're guerrillas. We get to do a little piece somewhere really outside of the city. And then that's, however, where we can actually, once a while, put on our ideas. I'm going to show a project later. So it's not in a significant way, but when we do that little project, however, and when it's built, it becomes reality, people come and see it. So it might have an influence on people. But of course, you know, does that really going to change the project we have been working on? This little urban project is outside of Shanghai. Does that going to change the Shanghai metropolitan area? Probably not. But it's a very small step. But who knows? Someone may think that's a better way of building city or living in the city. That might trigger some other projects. But it is only on that rather small scale we operate. And also, some architects, you know, again, like Ram, really is also a public intellectual. So for me, what he designs in the office and what he says to the media are almost equally important. And most architects don't get to play that role. And still, I think it's very important that architects design the way we believe in. And we may not go very far because the client would reject us and the city government would reject us. And so what? And then we try it again. So one of these days, you know, we get lucky, like what happened again to us, like in Shanghai. Sorry, it's a very long question. Answer for your short question. Yeah.
Would you agree to that kind of, the architect is a kind of partisan, 游击战?
Herself and to try to glue these elements together, because I think what is very interesting in an architect is actually that he is not only busy with design or with kind of creating a shape, but that the environment that he's working in or she is working in and the money needs to come from something is a very loaded situation from all angles from society. So as an architect, you actually have the possibility to try to combine all these aspects. You're not only taking care of the financials, you're not only taking care of the politics, you're not only taking care of the design and the engineering, but you can play a role in gluing these things together and trying to direct the outcome that comes out of all these points into a direction that you believe in or that you think is feasible for a city or outside of a city. And I think as long as you stay true to yourself and try to combine these different elements that play a role in projects, play a role in a city, you can play some sort of a role, but it is definitely not the determining role in the end. I think what we hear very often, and I think it's also what you're referring to, is that big iconic statements in architecture are very, very important. For example, we are in Beijing now, so maybe slide 29 would be interesting to show. We were asked, and Ram was asked many times about CCTV, and is it an iconic statement, or is it something that we designed and also finished and constructed because of we wanted to be involved in a society, we wanted to be involved in a business and in the politics around it and see how we could shape it. And I think one of the key things that happens very often, and then I go back to the dialogue between the West and China, is the easiest thing is to criticize and to say such a statement you should never make because you are doing it in a society, in a city that you don't know well, and maybe you do it for the wrong reasons. And I think totally the opposite, and I think our office thinks totally the opposite. RAM thinks the opposite. If you don't engage, you have never a role to play. If you engage, you can try to steer, and even it's only 1% discourse, you could try to provoke discourse. And I think that is the role of an architect, is to constantly engage in the development of a city, in the development of society, to see where you can provoke a discourse that would not be there if only finance rules, or if only politics rules, or only something else. And I think that is what I see as the role of an architect, is to simply try to...
A project is a sandwich, and definitely architects are the cold cuts in the middle. So we have the political concerns and power on one side, economical issues on the other side, and so on. I guess the only difference between what I'm going to say and what David said is that, so in any case, we have to deal with all these forces. But I don't know to what extent we have a real influence. So maybe at this point, I'd like to show my project. So the project I've been referring to is in the district of Jiading, outside of Shanghai. For our German friends, they have there's a big automobile manufacturing base there. They have a Formula One racetrack and so on out there. So anyway, so it's there. This is the center of the city, the Huangpu River and so on. And we were asked to, can I have the next slide, please? Or I can do it myself, right?
The green one, the green button.
Oh, the green button. Okay, thank you. So we were asked to design an industrial park, which is an idea I don't really, I'm not very sympathetic, put it that way, because it's a model of a workplace after the American suburban model. So you drive from home to your workplace, and then you work there, you go to a third place to shop, and then you drive back home. And then looking at the city of Shanghai today, if you are familiar with Shanghai, this is one of the nicest part of Shanghai. This is a very nasty picture. I intentionally took a very not nice picture of, this is a Xuhui Qu. Because you see all the urban problems, right? Here is this super wide road. This is not a street. And you don't see much pedestrians or cars. And the greenery as decoration and so on. So anyway, so that's kind of a city. And then we're asked to do the kind of a suburban workplace. And then we look at this place. As unreal as it might appear, actually this is a place real people still live in there. So you can see. It's touristy already to some extent, but you see the local people still living there. So for us, the question was, and still is, how do you reconcile these two urban scenarios? So that could be Disneyland, but the other one could be this total urban sprawl. And then, so I go quickly. What we discovered is this. See, I have too many slides. So if you look at this, that's how big a Jiading block is. It's about 400 by 400 meters. So when the size is that big, just give you a comparison. Berlin has the famous super block, which is 200 by 200 meters. 400 by 400 meter block in China is considered tiny. Usually is somewhere between 500 by 500 to 600 by 600. That's more typical. So we decided if this place is not just for work, but also a place for people to live, and could we really rethink of the scale? That's the only thing pretty much we did for the project, is to rethink about the scale of this place. And then in the end, as you can see here, we went for 40 by 40 meter block. If the bigger one is super block and this is a mini block. And then other things we did is to create a pedestrian walk system so that is covered by, by these covered walkway, so that there's the environment would protect people from the elements, and so on. So what happened, I actually like to use this to illustrate what David was saying. Initially, the clients didn't accept the idea. They didn't think that there's a market for it, which was true. I don't think the market was there. And then so the project was on hold for a year or so. And then it's not that I understood better personally of the political, economical forces and so on, but maybe because in our idea, there is this sincere concern of the livability of the urban environment. After a year and a half, a miracle happened. Somehow they did market testing. There was a desire for this mini block working community, another project under construction. So, so I don't really, I'm not saying anything different from what David is saying, but I guess I'm just saying that we understand, as architects, architecture, buildings and cities, and then we offer that expertise to all these different forces. In fact, I think Michel Foucault once made an argument whether the so-called intellectuals would offer to society is the bit you know the best. So and I guess the next thing is that you're hoping for the best or miracle. In our case, in this case, it did happen. So, and then here you can see these are the mini blocks, and we were studying something, again, very, very traditional, very, very old, the periphery blocks, and this is all the different topological study of peripheral building, and organizing the space for different companies and so on. Study of the interior of it, the offices and so on. Now that's how it looks. This bit is almost completed. The density went up almost 50%. So the program was a hotel, because we really tried to put in living in this actually office park. So in any case, we were able not to do apartments, because by Chinese codes, we're not allowed to put much residential in there. So we put two different hotels. This one, the way we did it, is adding, oh, I'm sorry, I guess I can't go back. That's okay. We added a floating ring as hotel on top of 4 mini blocks. And these are not the architecture design. They were actually just urban studies. But these are the more the facades we have been working on. So in any case, I think that, I hope David shares that. I believe you do. So however small a role we play in the whole thing, I remain actually optimistic as an architect, especially in China. In Europe, I don't really know that well, but in the US, I think that architect's role was already very small before, but today it's getting even smaller. So I truly believe that if someone practices as an architect in the United States, the person is having a much harder time than we do here. So here, you can still offer what you believe, a vision, an idea. Again, you may get rejected, but you may get accepted. So anyway, so that's the project that illustrates why we could remain positive, at least for a little bit longer.
Right. I think it's also very interesting what you're saying about, how small that role is and staying positive. I think you need to know how small it is to be positive. Because the moment that you think it's a big role, you become arrogant. Arrogant people are not mostly positive. And what is also very interesting is if you overestimate what you actually can contribute, you're not contributing anything, because the gesture that you're thinking about should be so big and world-changing that the weight on your shoulders becomes so large that you can actually not be creative or intellectual anymore, and therefore come up with, in my opinion, something that is very commercial and that everybody likes, because then it can be big. So for me as an architect, I think all this type of rethinking the city, the mini block, which for me is still rather large growing up in Amsterdam, which is a city that is also made out of blocks, but it is a very interesting thought. What for me is, what I would like to ask you, seeing your images, is the mini block, which is called the mini block in China. How do you envision that in the idea of the mega city? Do you see this as an experiment that should be limited and should be only there to spark locally something new, or do you see it as the model that should be around for all these millions of people because it's socially a better model to live in?
I think it's very interesting to think that often that for a lot of these very serious architects, we like to come up with so-called original design, and then we don't want it to be copied.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's the opposite. I hope it's something that people would want to copy, because for my idea at the beginning statement, I'm not sure if I was clear. It's about the city could be really huge. However, the city consists of these small, sort of a self-contained parts. So this is one of these, in a way, cells. And the city can be made of a lot more of these things. So that, again, this is my personal experience, I guess. So you can live, work, and do your everyday thing within this small cell. And then you go into the other parts of the mega city for cultural events, for the opera, for some more exotic shopping or experience and so on. But anyway, so that's sort of my vision of a big city.
What I find very interesting is that you're saying it for a big city, and I would say a lot of cities in China, because I've been traveling a lot through the country, have still kind of your mini block. Actually, they have a block that is much smaller. But because they want to be a mega city, or because of their urban growth and have to deal with that urban growth to become bigger, they're actually erasing this, and it is not a topic. So maybe somebody can put slide 36 on. Yesterday I was in Darin. I'm doing a very interesting preservation project there of a total different scale. Yeah.
We will come to Datum and the example of Datum.
Okay.
I would, before, put a question to both of you, because you both showed very different examples that architecture, in a way, is successful. And I would, for a short moment, like to come back on this iconic architecture you showed first, which is also the success of an architect, in a way. My question is, I fully appreciate your approach, but my question still is, in medieval European cities, we had cathedrals, which were incredibly huge for these small cities. But obviously, they were necessary not only out of religious reasons, but also as a kind of identification of the citizen with his city he refers to. And my question is, does a megacity with millions of new citizens which were not born in that city, migrated to their city, have no real emotional relationship to that city, do they need iconic monuments to feel as citizens? I got the feeling in a way that, for example, Niaozhao at the moment is a kind of reference for Beijingers when they think of their own city. My question is, does we need these iconographic monuments?
I think there are two very important points I'd like to make. One is that to have monuments in the city and to design the city as monuments, they're very different. I've seen recently, because actually I more than seen, I'm involved in a project in the city of Zhengzhou, and the urban planner is the late, is that the name? I think it's Kurakawa, and the Japanese architect. So the city was designed as a monument. Everything was really spread out, and there's axes and of course all sorts of iconic buildings. I have some reservation towards that. I don't think people can live in a monument, but city with monument is very different. So I showed an urban design project, and David just showed CCTV. Actually, our office, rather, we're working on, it's already under construction. We have been working on the SZTV, Shenzhen television. It's a 200-meter tower. Originally, our design reflected important urban thinking on our part, although I have to say the idea was borrowed from Berlin. I was thinking of having, again, mini blocks for like 3 stories, and then floating above these small blocks is the tower. And then, however, after our design was approved, after the project was approved by the client, and then we had to get rid of the mini blocks. Now the tower just go all the way to the ground. For me, still what I believe is that I think towers are iconic buildings, and fabric can coexist. And in that moment, I think there are a lot of interesting things may happen. And the cathedral scenario is something that for the past. You know why? Because we share, or in European cities, citizens share one spiritual life. So that icon makes sense. And then today, like in Beijing, why sports facility should be an icon when if we worship? It doesn't make sense for me. It all becomes these huge billboards for different interests, for commercial interests, for other interests. So in that case, I still think the fabric would be more important than the icons. Although if we have fabric, I don't mind the icons.
Would you like to answer, or would you like to continue with your Darin example?
No. We get back to it later, you said, so I trust that. No, I think that it's a very interesting question you have. And firstly, for me, again, the question is what is iconic and who invented the term iconic? Because that is also a question we are fighting against constantly. So Rem is an iconic architect. Well, everybody know he isn't, yeah, because he's kind of thinking of concepts out of research. So what is an icon? An icon can only be if people support and also not support what is the project. That means it's talked about, that means it fulfills a position in the city, and that means it contributes something. So that for me is an important thing to say, because a cathedral was kind of to discuss the idea of believing and the idea of what happens when you die, which was very important in that time of life. I think now what an iconic has become, is it beautiful or ugly? And I said in my introduction already, that is actually what we should avoid, and especially in a city. Nevertheless, we are accused of making a lot of iconic architecture. But I would like to go back to that slide 29 that you were referring to, because if you look carefully at that slide, you maybe see the irony of why people call it iconic. Because we don't show this building, none of our images about CCTV show this building as the building on its own enlightened architecture. It shows it in the city, because it's the place of the building is the city. Even here in this picture you see TVCC. Of course, our biggest disaster, or the thing what an architect never wants to happen, is that a building that you're still creating is already broken down or burned down in this case. But should you then not show it anymore? Should you not be proud of it anymore because it has an idea in the minds of people now that it is an evil thing? So I think if you look carefully at CCTV and the architecture we're making, an icon can only be an icon if it contributes something to the fabric. So I strongly support that the fabric is what it is about, and then only the icon can survive. You cannot put it in the desert. Of course, you can do that for a tomb, but you cannot do that for a building that lives. And I think that is how I would respond to your question. I think architecture in itself can only become interesting if it is small scale or large scale, when there's a dialogue about it. When there's a concept behind it, and when there's an idea behind it which is interesting. All the architecture that is not discussed, that is generic in a way that nobody really notices, is actually not part of a debate or of a contribution to a megacity.
I wanted to add, looking at this image, I remember my conversation with Ram when the competition was done, because he, David knows him much better, but I know him also as very much an idealist. So he planned the grounds of CCTV really almost like a park. And the interesting thing, of course, today if you go there, it's not a park, because the high security demanded by the television station and so on would not allow it to be a park. I just wanted to say what's interesting, however, most people think that, okay, architects, you either didn't have the power or you were thinking on the wrong track, being too idealistic. But what Ram said, I still remember, is that, and he basically was saying that, okay, it's not a park now, but you never know. One of these days, it could become a park as architects design. It's not, I don't think this is, it's just for the argument. I think actually it's very important to understand that today the social structure, political structure, and so on, may not allow us to do certain things, but it doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever. I think actually, so I'm saying Ram's very much right, and I appreciate so very much hearing these, because otherwise it's very easy to get caught. Like the building code is going to be like that forever. The structural code for China was something that designed based on the Soviet version of it 50 years ago. I'm very curious to find out the Russian code today. So it got to be changed. If it's not changing, it means that it will be changed, and so on. So that's something I think, again, going back maybe to the theme. So however little we can do in the city as architects, but if you really consider not the small picture of the project you're dealing with, but the bigger one, and then you have to inject a fair dose of idealism into the project.
I have a question. I mean, the charm of this picture for me lies basically in this 5-story building in the foreground and the contrast with this huge monument behind. My question simply is, will these 5-story buildings still exist?
When was the picture
2 or 3 years?
taken? Is that
I think 3 months ago, 4 months ago.
In this case, I'm not optimistic. I think it could go any time.
But that has a total different reason. And I think that's not because of the monument is there. And I think that is an issue that you're trying to touch upon is, what if you create something that becomes a symbol or that becomes a new element in the city? Do you then spark that around it history is erased or kind of social life is erased? But that's, I think, something that's a real dangerous topic to kind of point that in the direction of the architect or of the creator of that thing, because also CCTV is created based on a total different idea, but especially because other people give you an assignment. It's not that you're doing something like that to move a city forward or to erase a part of the city. I think you actually do it for the opposite reasons. But yes, I think in China, and there we can go, you're making a bridge, but we can go back to what I tried to start in a discussion about the mini block is, what are we currently seeing as a healthy city, and what are we currently seeing as the history of a city? And that is what I wanted to touch upon. From Beijing perspective, you see the neighborhood and the way the neighborhood is kind of grow and have another neighborhood and another neighborhood and then create a mega city as its history. But funnily enough, that history is erased for reasons that are mainly political in my point of view, but it becomes then the new norm, and that's a very interesting topic to discuss, because cities that are not mega cities are obviously looking at mega cities because they think they're healthy, while mega cities probably have the most problems, more than the smaller cities, and then start trying to copy it or try to add ingredients into it to create grandeur or spark the discussion about how the city should grow. And then I would like to go to 36. You saw the slide already a little bit earlier. As I said, I was in Datong. This picture is from yesterday, so it is very opportunistic for me to show it today because I didn't do a lot of research behind this picture, but I find it important to kind of show it because this is the old city, what they call the ancient city of Datong. Of course, a very beautiful city. You might know it because of the grottos and the hanging temple and all these things. But this is really right in the heart of the ancient city. And you see Hutong-like area where a lot of local people live, and local people live with a lot of pleasure. There's a new mayor since 2008, and I think he's doing a lot of good things for the city. But there's also kind of the issue of how do you discuss this type of architecture, this type of block, this type of how you live, and the happiness within that, and maybe also the disappointment within that, in the terms of a city that should grow into a mega city, or in the next city, the third tier or fourth tier city of China. And if you then we go to 35, slide 35, this is really opposite the street. And you see what is happening there. That is a mega creation of new apartment buildings. And then a lot of us in the West immediately ask, who is going to live there? But I already gave that answer in slide 36, because the people living there so happily in that ancient city are going to live here, because they are going to be relocated in these areas. You can question that. Is that good or is that bad? I don't want to go to that topic, because I think that is something we cannot finish in an afternoon. But what I would be interested in also saying is that what you see in the forefront, probably nobody thought about that, but is as new as what you see at the back. Namely, that's the new city wall of Datong, and I especially say the new city wall, because it was constructed in 2011, and it looks very much like the city wall of the ancient city when it was the capital, because it has been the capital of China. And that's for a reason, because they want to bring the history back. And they do that exactly at the place where that ancient city of the previous slide is. So where this wall now is, 3 years ago, there was this other part of the city that I showed you before. And I find that a very interesting debate in the growth of a city towards becoming a megacity. So a lot of problems that megacities have are actually erased. A lot of good things that they have are taken as models and transported to smaller cities where they actually don't exist, and they are just injected. So we need, like in Beijing, a huge historical monument to become important, other than the grottos and the hanging temples that they have. And because of that, do we change our social system? And that is maybe the main question that is happening in many cities that have the aspiration to become a mega city, is the change of the social structure that is needed to become large, to become economically important, to become historically interesting. Therefore, we need to maybe reinvent it. You told me that you also spoke to the mayor and that he said, yeah, nobody knows 500 years from now that it was only created in 2009.
Maybe 50 years from now.
Maybe 50 years from now. But it's a kind of an interesting topic that always plays a role in a mega agglomerate or something that aspires to be.
Before asking you what your comment on that, I would just for information tell you that it's not only the city wall, the new old city wall, which is about 12 kilometers around, but every building within this area, which is not old in the sense that it may be from the Qing dynasty, will be torn down and replaced by a new old courtyard or a similar building like that. It means everything what happened in this area after, let's say, 1911 will be completely erased and replaced by new old buildings. Your comment, please.
On one hand, I have to say, as an architect, that was educated within the modernist mentality, put it that way. And of course, I'm struggling with, what is new, what is old, what is authentic, what is fake, and so on. But on the other hand, however, I wonder if not, we are actually living in a postmodernist culture, so that all these issues are much more blurred than we think they are, and then the government, the decision makers are in a sense really true postmodernists. They can see this kind of symbiosis. So I don't know. I have a very complex reaction towards such projects. I have to say something that I thought and actually spoke to the media at various occasions about Beijing. So people always say, you're an architect, what do you think of Beijing today? I did use the word ugly, by the way, because I grew up in Beijing. It was a very harmonious, poor maybe in some way, but very consistently a good-looking city, and so on. So what do you want to do about it? And I said, we could build the inner city of Beijing. And then here it is, really happening in Datong. So I don't know. So again, it only adds to the dilemma I have. I'm not sure I want to go there and see it now. But I think it's possible. So if there is the old city of Datong and it's surrounded by these high-rise apartments, it's actually possible. Probably not that different than what I'm thinking, what I have been thinking about. One way of really get to that small bit of old Beijing back. If the construction is based on really the way it was done before, actually it's pretty remarkable, right? And so it looks
totally not critical about what is constructed here and what the idea of what they're trying to do with the city. But what I'm interested in is how much attention is paid to the social system that needs to be the driver of this. So the postmodernism is a right comment. I think also the idea of kind of moving something forward and therefore looking backward is not a bad thing. And I'm totally not critical, but what I'm trying to get to in the topic of a metropolis or in a mega city, in my opinion, architecture cannot create a metropolis, cannot create a mega city. I think it's the social system and the way we interfere with it and the way we try to discourse it is in the end determines if it is a city or not. I would like to give an example. I live in Hong Kong because my family lives there, and I'm traveling around a lot, and every time I come back to Hong Kong I think, where are the architects? And they are not in many places there. But why is it a metropolis? That's because of its interesting position, its interesting nature, its interesting density, which grew a system that exists nowhere else in the world, a social system. It's the same with if you arrive in Beijing. I have been a long time ago, not so long when you grow up, but it changed significantly. But what is it that makes it the city and what makes it that mega city? It's the social system and the way the people behave. Maybe it's not on the right course anymore in your perspective, but I think from an architectural point of view, to think that you can plan a social system and therefore a mega city is for me a question that we are constantly struggling with, because we are asked to do it, but at the same time you actually cannot unless you speak to all these people that form that social system. And that for me is a very interesting part of the proposition.
I think there's another huge factor behind, I'm guessing, but but I think probably it's closer, well not closer, but not that far from the truth. So besides the social engine and economic engine, but also the ambition of a few people who are the political power, it's very much a drive for the building of a mega city. And the interesting thing, well, probably not very interesting, and then they often succeed, right? Even without the resources, but they really want to build a mega city, and mega city is going to happen. Again, you know, my experience with the Zhengzhou project is like this. So, however, that's not at least not only in China, you know, it's not a Chinese thing. So I'm just thinking of Brasilia was created in the middle of nowhere. What's the name of Australians' capital?
Canberra.
Canberra was like that. Although they are not mega cities, they are these you know, administrative and political center of a country. Was totally created in an artificial way with a will, right? There was a will to do so, and then it happened. So.
I mean, what we are looking here, especially here in China, in the last years, is the building of huge cultural infrastructures, museums, concert halls, theaters, very often with internationally renowned architects, but now growingly also by Chinese architects. And interestingly, a lot of these buildings now we call empty shells. Is it for an architect a kind of attraction? 油画，这是一种油画。盖这么大的一个剧场，尽管他完全知道，里面就是什么都不发生。
I think, see, first of all, architects are people, we're not saints. So if there's opportunity to make a major cultural facility, I don't think any architect's gonna back up and say, you know, what are the programs and so on. If you don't have any program, I'm not gonna do it. And also, you have to remember that I didn't really participate in the Beijing National Grand Theater project. If I did, my project would be rejected on day one, because for me, a huge building sitting there only to be used in the evening wasn't terribly interesting. I would like to see the ground level of the National Grand Theater to be a shopping mall, so people can shop, can eat during the day, and of course have you know, a symphony and opera in the evening. That idea is just a little too outlandish. So it means that, again, if we're asked to do opera house, probably we do it in such a way we can't influence much of the programs. But I just wonder if there is going to be a true demand on the part of the citizens if they do want to see an opera. And then I think not architecture, but rather opera would survive. So I was born in Beijing. I'm totally local. There's one thing is really remarkable about this city. I recommend it to everyone here, is the stage drama scene. It's one of the things in the city, and it's very difficult for them to survive. But yet, because there are so many people in Beijing, still kind of religiously go to see stage dramas. And then stage drama survives. You go to the Capital Theater, now you go to a tiny little theater in a hutong, and it's just totally vibrant. So that's what I think is in the end, would be hopefully the case for a lot of these cultural facilities. They may look sad and who knows, and empty, but if there's such, again, will, but from the people. So in Beijing, and it's just remarkable after all these years, you think people is going to only go to a rock concert or what, but these theater houses every night are filled. There's going to be I'm just going to do a commercial for my friends. There's going to be a very important play at the Capitol Theater. It's called the Melancholia of a Comedy, and it's only two actors talking all night. Fantastic. Even with translation, I believe it's fantastic. It's gonna. They showed it. They played it last year with packed house every night, so it's coming back.
OMA, as far as I know, is very much involved in one of these huge cultural architectural projects, Kowloon West.
But also in Taipei.
Is it building empty shells?
Over West Kowloon, I want to be political, because I think West Kowloon is a chance for the city that needs to be successful, but if it's going to be successful is a big question mark. So I think it's too early to answer your question. But I think the key project that I would like to show is Taipei, because I think one of the things that you are saying is what we try to contradict there. Can I have 31, slide 31? So for me, a cultural facility is not about architecture, but it's about real culture. And this is a proposition that Ram and myself actually made in 2008 for a big theater in Taipei. And everybody thought that we were totally ridiculous, because we were asked to build the biggest theater of Greater China on top of a beautiful site in Taipei, namely the night market, which is a place where millions of people go every year to eat, to shop, to do their things. And they wanted to replace that low culture by high culture, namely an opera house, a dance theater, and a multi-perform theater. And there we had to question, you're erasing a program that is very important for the city, and you're replacing it by a program that is important for a part of the city. And so we said, why can you not combine it? We were, by the way, there were 360 architects participating in the open competition. We were the only one raising the question by our design. And we said, okay, so just let's simply keep the night market. And so the big thing at the bottom, what you see, is the night market. It's still there. And we try to create a cube on top of it and hang the three theaters from the cube. Of course, architecturally, pretty interesting. But the reason was simply that we could condense the core of the theater to be minimal, namely only 18 meters by 18 meters, which you could implement in the night market, which was very big, and then have a theater above it. So connect local culture with high culture. At that moment of time, people said it is ugly, it looks like tofu and egg, which we said, oh, that's good for the night market, but they all said it's not realistic. And we said, why is it not realistic? It is very realistic, because this is exactly the place where theater makers want to perform their theater, namely where the people are, and not where they have to travel to and where it's empty. And we got support by important theater makers like Stan Lai, and who are also very famous on the mainland. And they adopted the plan, and we're currently in construction. So this is really going to be there. It's an ugly building. We say ourselves it's a machine for theater, but it's going to really significantly change the perception of an empty shell for culture, because I think it's very important that the use of a culture shell is the first thing you need to look at before you can even create it as an architect. But I want to also say something else, because this is now an advertisement for my own building, which I don't want to do. I want to go to slide 33, which is a project in Shunde in the south.
did you want to comment on this?
No. I love the idea.
Okay.
I'm all for it. Yeah.
So, thank you. So this is something totally different. So this is Shunde in the south of China, where they wanted to create something like what you are referring to, namely a cultural axis. So the right picture is what it currently is. And you see the axis already clearly, and you see the government center on the top, and then the opera house, the library, the museum, the next museum, another museum, and a few along the line, and then great emptiness because it ends in the river. And you could question is that this is cultural shells, as you refer to. But what it replaced is what is next to it, because that's a picture of kind of 15 years before. And funnily enough, I think if you ask the German...
Want to use that.
I think it's the 2 pointed. So this is 15 years before. This is the existing situation with the cultural axis, the government, the museum, the library, another few museums coming. And here you see a picture of that axis, gigantic, almost I think 68 meters. And here, this is what it was. And if you ask in the West about Chinese culture, one of the things that we know so well is kind of the water and the rice paddies, and it might sound cliche to you, or part of for you, but actually, why would this not be possible to preserve, and not only preserve, but enhance with new culture on top of it? And I think that's an interesting question. So an empty shell might be an interesting topic to discuss, but what is the other answer? As long as nobody is discussing what another answer could be, and you're the only one in a large group of people that would want to have that discussion, and I'm not saying me or you, but anybody, then it's never going to happen. We were extremely lucky. You were talking about miracles. I think Taipei was a miracle that anybody chose that building. But that the fact that this has become the norm, and if you discuss something else, you need a miracle to realize it. And that is, I think, very difficult for us to comment on, because you are triggered by saying you should not build an empty shell, but it became the norm. And how do you change the norm?
Do we have an answer to that question?
No, I think it's pretty interesting to look at this. Shunde is in Guangdong, right?
Yeah, Guangdong province. Yeah.
I just hate these kind of plazas. It doesn't make any sense. So for me, if it's an empty building is meant to be for some cultural activities, at least it's better than a big empty plaza in a hot climate. So again, this is where probably we are pretty powerless as architects anyway. But if that can be, say, corrected, these kind of big plazas, it's one step up for sure.
Oh, we are coming to an end of our 2-3 persons discussion and open the discussion for the public. My last question would be, I think we all three agree that this is not what we want for a mega city and for nobody. But is the necessity to reflect much more environment issues in city building and architecture than ever before, and that now we have this new concept of the low carbon cities, which is urging people to reflect what does it mean to create cities in sense of producing carbon or to reduce carbon output. Does it really influence future architecture? Will it have an impact of that, how we think big cities?
I think First of all, we are protecting the environment for us. So the city is about livability. So we have to really be able to have convenience and comfort and enjoy the city, and then we talk about environmental protection. However, interestingly, a lot of the possible ways to cut down the carbon and to make it less polluted and so on have a lot to do with the lifestyle. And then I believe that a lot of these denser, smaller urban fabric, not only they are good for livability, but also good for sustainability. So I guess I'm just arguing that there probably are other approaches, but livability and sustainability, they go hand in hand. For me, it's almost like just different sides of one issue.
I think it's a very important topic in general in urban planning and in architecture at the moment, because it's very needed to protect the environment. If you put it in the context of a city, it's interesting to see that the carbon that a city produces, especially cities without good public transport, are significant, but that most of the carbon contribution is still outside of the city, and I will go back to that later on. But a big problem what I find in this discussion is that because everybody says it's so important, it became not a dialogue, but it became a necessity before people really thought about it. And if that happens, it becomes advertised. So currently, environmental design, urban planning, green, whatever, it simply becomes a gimmick. And the problem is that nobody is really discussing the topic. Everybody is doing it in their own way, trying to bring a small contribution. But where's the real issue? And in that sense, OMA tried to work, and now we can give a European, for the first time in this dialogue, I can give a European and a Chinese example. Can I have slide 38? Because we think actually that it is not the city that first needs to be sustainable, but first a whole continent or an unbelievable amount of area needs to be sustainable. Because also in China, about 80% of the carbon China produces is produced outside of the cities, namely there where the factories are. They are never in the inner city. The main carbon problem we have is still related to resources that we use to make our produce. And that produce is simply not efficient. And if we then start talking about the city, we can only solve like about 20% of the whole dialogue. If you start discussing the whole country and how we deal with resources and how we exchange them, we can become more significant and smart. This is an European energy grid report that we produced for the EU, where we looked at where kind of the largest energy points in Europe are. Not a very typical architectural assignment or urban planning assignment, but we try to connect all these energy points by being smart. So, for example, you have cold in the north, you have heat in the south, and in certain parts of the year you would want to exchange it. If you would create a grid in which you can exchange these type of things, it becomes less carbon intensive. To our own surprise, this report was actually a criticism to kind of the environmental policy the Netherlands was developing. Germany took this on and asked us, can you present this to the European Union? And so we presented this, and this became a real project. And currently, and you probably read it this morning in the newspapers, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Great Britain are creating this windmill ring that is in the North Sea on this picture and trying to really connect their resources. When that idea was taken on, we are now making a similar report for China, which is exceptional because we were asked by the government of China to think of this large scale. So I think if we want to have a serious debate, and that's simply our approach, so I'm not saying other approaches are not contributing to a solution, but you can only do it when you put it in the largest possible framework. Because if you look at it on stamps, it can maybe contribute very little also in China. And if you look at it on the biggest possible scale that you can politically organize, then you might make a difference. And this is just the start of a discussion, something we as architects can never ever steer, never ever direct, and also never have more contribution to than initiating it. But it's a very interesting example of kind of how you can change a little bit the discourse. So for me, environmental is important, as long as people look at it at a large scale and don't use it as a gimmick to become important, because then we are kind of selling the planet for being important.
Well, to be a very effective in this matter, of course, the micro scale would be important. But I believe that we all try to contribute to the reduction of carbon in whatever way we can. So in that sense, so the macro level and the micro level are both important.
我就想我们现在到这个时候，我想请观众给你们一个提问题的机会。
所以我其实想问一下，关于这个张先生和刚才大卫先生都提到了这个大同的这个城市改变的事情，我觉得这个是一个可能非常有代表性的一个改造的一个事件。其实我非常希望就听听两位觉得就是在旧城的改造，在中国或者说在欧洲有没有什么特别好的案例？因为从我的角度来讲，我觉得一方面体制方面肯定是很大的问题，再一方面来讲，我觉得可能需要更好的一个案例来说服现在一些政府的行政官员，因为在暂时没有办法改变体制的很多问题的时候，seeing is believing， 就是看见的，如果一个好的案例的话，可能对于我们的城市长成什么样子，应该是比较是一个非常好的一件事情，我觉得。
Good question. So I think, firstly, I'm not going to say anything about if Darin is successful or not, because that you cannot say at this moment of time. But I think cultural heritage becomes an issue if you focus on one part of culture only. So in the case of Darin, that could be like the era of the walled city. While the city in itself only exists because it was built up in many layers and in many cultural lives. So as long as you restore all these layers to a certain extent, you can give a cultural section and a real cultural heritage footprint or perspective of a city. So I think what you need to lobby for is not to do one thing successful, but to make a cut almost from prehistoric times when we all started walking up and started doing things more intelligent than many animals, to kind of the current situation. Good examples, I think there are many good examples that cover parts of this cut. Not only in Europe, not only in the United States, not only in China. So I would say Rome is a very typical example. Yeah, there is a cut from kind of very early on prehistorical times till now, modern days. In China, I think Beijing, although it is transforming heavily, has a cultural heritage in many sections of its existence that is visible and not displayed in an honesty. In China, I think there are more cities. Xi'an is maybe another example who has also maybe made mistakes but also did things significantly well. And in America, I think these cities are of course much younger, but if you look at cities like Washington or I would say Boston or El Paso, maybe even more, they have a section through all culture life. So I think cultural heritage success is not based on an example of a city wall or an example of a cathedral that has been done successful, or a temple or whatever. But cultural heritage becomes successful when there's a cross-section through the city that reflects that city at all time and in its existence at all time. So I would again want to say that it is way too early to criticize. Maybe there are many things to add, and then it becomes a successful case.
肯定有一个他自己的，因为我也看了他很多的报道，他有他自己的一些想法。不是说所有的新建筑，对于从文化遗产保护角度来讲，就全都是错的。很多新的建筑，包括 CCTV 这个大楼，我觉得从它的建筑的位置和它刚才您说的这个对于公众开放的这个角度来讲，都是非常好的一些事情。我想说的其实甭管是保护老建筑还是建造新的建筑，我觉得中国可能缺少的都是一种耐心。我觉得 OMA 和张先生可能都是非常有名的建筑师了，可能有这样的机会，能够说服地方政府做一些可以耐心做的事儿。但是很多小的建筑师，不太出名的建筑师，甚至那些没有名气的建筑师，他们能做的事情就是跟着这个甲方做一些非常着急的事情。因为我也从文化遗产的角度来看这个城市的建设。中国的这个城市化的速度，应该我看过一个数据，我不知道是不是有误啊，但是他说从2000年到2010年，中国的城市化速度从30%到45%，那么就是每一年是1.5个百分点的城市化率，那么这是非常高的，意味着中国每年有几千万的人口涌进这个城市，所以我觉得这个可能是我个人觉得在现在这个情况下很难做到一些特别好的，甭管是保护也好，或者说是特别漂亮的，或者是优秀的能够传承下去的建筑的一个主要原因吧。
To RAM a little bit more, even for RAM, I'm not sure in this case because the system doesn't support the opinion of in a Chinese term, the opinions of an expert. It's all the political, economical powers at work. So if they listen to us, we wouldn't have the Beijing as it is today. It just it doesn't mean that we shouldn't really speak out our opinions, but I don't believe they listen at all. I have to say I don't think even there is a chance for me to tell anyone in power of, hey, there's another way of doing things. This is a reality. I don't think there's a way for me to change it, but I will be very happy always say what I think is probably the better thing to do.
I think the irony is that you ask us to explain them about patience, while we need to be patient to be given that opportunity.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Chang. You had mentioned at the start of your talk that you feel that Beijing is not dense enough as a city. And I'm someone who likes density as well, but I'm wondering what role you think the Siheyuan and Hutong neighborhoods could play in creating greater density in Beijing, because clearly some of these high-rise apartment complexes, like the ones at the end of the number 5 subway line in the north end of it, those are very dense communities. That's very dense population, probably greater density of people per square kilometer than exists in many old Siheyuan neighborhoods. But I wouldn't want to see that type of housing replace the inner city Hutong areas of Beijing. So I'm just wondering what role you think they play in the preservation or in the creation of density in the city.
You're talking about 3 things together. So let's go one by one. So let's define density first. So we can easily compare, let's just go from Beijing to Hong Kong. So the average, what we say in architecture, floor area ratio, FAR, in Beijing is little less than 3. So you can build 3 times as the land. And then in Hong Kong, on the island, the average would go up to 12. So in Manhattan, the average would be around 6 also. And then you can see how well the city of Hong Kong functions. And so if we use, again, this FAR as the reference for density, and then we can see the room for development. And then some Hong Kong architects, and they have done study of Beijing and actually proposed something like these. Again, like what we were talking about before, these people's, these Hong Kong architects' opinion and was never heard by the government, the decision makers. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that, the second question is that density doesn't mean you have to build high-rise. Also, in the field of architecture, this is well studied for decades. Actually, my father was an architect. He was very much involved with that. So just again give you Hong Kong as an example. So if you redesign Kowloon, the whole Kowloon area with low-rise, high-density building, you could build the same amount of building within 4 stories. It's been done, there are studies, and there are drawings and so on. So this is a second question. The third question is that, so if you talk about preservation, like the gentleman asked before, so are you saying that we should save the city as a museum, or we save the city to be used by current urban life? They are very much different questions. So of course you may say, if we don't build any building beyond 1 level for Beijing and the density might be too low. That's probably true. And then of course, it doesn't mean that we need to go to high rise. There are 2 extremes. So there's one building very interesting in Beijing. It's on the Jinyu Hutong. Now I don't really know the name. It used to be called Peace Hotel. Anyway, I think it's probably still does. 和平宾馆. It's about, it's probably, I'd say, 8-story little bar building floating above the courtyard. Now it's all being renovated, decorated. It looks pretty terrible, but it was very elegantly done. Imagine we have courtyard fabric like these, and then we have a lot of these little 8-story boxes floating on top of the courtyard. That would create probably easily, twice the density than the courtyard fabric, but yet would remain probably keep the courtyard fabric more or less intact. The courtyard house density is about, again using FAR, is 0.35 to 0.45. That's exactly the same density for the suburban subdivisions in the U.S. This is very interesting. But because courtyard houses are introverted, they can be really butt onto each other, connected, so that it creates a very different density. So in the end, there's a better urbanity for Beijing than for, a lot more so than for Houston, for instance. Yeah. So anyway, so they were the 3 questions, and then that's how I see them.
看过您的就是一段采访，是关于那个上海联合企业馆的那个有关环保节能的问题。然后您说那个传统的材料上，就是运输安装，然后建筑本身的那个施工上，由于它那个材料重量的问题，然后会产生就是很多的那个能耗。然后您也一直致力于就是减轻那个建筑它那个本身的重量，然后去选择就是塑料这种有机材料。然后我就是说，您说那个 建筑未来的材料一定是塑料，我本人特别同意这一点。然后但是就产生一个问题，就是这个塑料它在燃烧之后，它会发出那种有毒气体，然后或者其他什么东西，然后相较于传统的就是这种木头，然后金属这种传统材料就会对人体伤害更大。然后就能不能就问一下，就您在就这种消防这种方面，以及燃烧后就它怎么处理这件事情，然后
就是说你用木头，你就要砍伐森林，那是不是你也不环保？所以首先要明白一点，现在所有谈的环保和像减碳这些措施呢，都是有一个相对的平衡的，没有一个绝对的。所以比方说，如果今天咱们中国像芬兰一样种高密度的环保树林，这些树林3年还跟树种有关系，你可能就能砍伐，5年就可以砍伐。所以用木头呢，也就是环保了。那当然从中国来说，去买芬兰的木头，那是不是又有问题？因为价格的关系啊，还有等等等等，所以这是一个问题。所以没有一个东西是绝对的是环保的。那塑料的问题是这样，首先你要注意到塑料的原料是原油啊，是对吧？是 crude oil。说这个东西呢，就是说，本来咱们能源也是它哈，然后塑料也是它，这里面又有一个平衡。那我实际上是觉得，反正烧这个原油也不够烧哈，还不如用来做一些塑料产品。有些塑料产品是可以100%回收的，像聚碳酸酯 polycarbonate， 还有像我中文反而不会说，像 polyethylene 等等，都是可以回收的。所以这是第二个问题。所以有些塑料本身就不对。这个防火的问题是这样，这个问题呢，这是一个技术问题。首先要相信技术是不断的在改善它的。今天它放的毒气多，不见得它明天还放的毒气多。现在我们在盖一个玻璃钢的房子哈 ，fiberglass 做材料一个房子，我们的做法很简单，来通过消防，就是所有的这个玻璃钢的结构件是在那个建筑的维护的外边的，所以等于就是如果遇了火灾之后，那个毒气实际上所谓要有的，实际上是在外面不在里面。因为我自己是个建筑师啊，我不是一个材料工程师、科学家。你问我怎么减一个材料的毒气，我还真不知道。可是我们的工作方式是，建筑师实际上在很多方面都是跟不同的科学家和工程师合作的，所以我们主要是使用材料，我们并不就是我们并不发明设计材料。
一个问题啊，就是近几年来，中国一些建筑就引起很大的争论，就是已经成为这个标志性建筑的，像央视的新楼，还有前阵出现的苏州的秋裤门，还有比基尼这样的建筑。之所以出现争论，您觉得是因为这个大众的欣赏水平没有达到那个程度，还是专家的审美和这个大众的审美有一定的偏差？这是第一个问题。然后第二个问题就是就是我国目前城市的整体的规划和设计是不是还处在一个比较粗放的阶段？就是您觉得怎么样能把一个城市和它的这个地域的文化很好的融合起来？谢谢。在这儿答了，实在是答不出来，因为多少人现在一天到晚就做这个工作，没有一个简单的答案的。如果你感兴趣，10年之后回来找我，我可能那会儿可能对中国的城市有更深的认识。第一个问题，你说的2方面，一方面就是是不是大众的欣赏水平和这个专业人员欣赏水平不一样，有这个，肯定有这点。可是更重要的一点，希望媒体哈，我估计你是媒体，听你说话那口气哈，就是能够引导大家不去想，刚才就 David 也讲，不去整天想这些房子好看难看。
而是想这些房子对我日常的生活到底有什么意义。就是一个大楼，就是咱们就不讲了，就讲故宫吧。故宫是咱们非常非常重要的文化遗产。那个我上一次去故宫啊，因为我正好，我这例子不太好，因为我跟故宫有点工作关系，所以我最近去过。我跟我这样年龄哈，就是50几岁的人，可能上一次去故宫都是20几岁的时候，30年也不去一趟。不是说它不重要，它到底什么样的跟你日常生活没关系。咱们应该关注咱们的日常生活，孩子怎么去上学，你的那个到底买菜方便不方便，等等等等。所以现在对建筑的评价，把建筑当成一张画来看，我觉得是偏差了，或者当成一个雕塑。所以你说的好多房子，有的我也不知道哈，就是它什么样子。我是觉得有2方面的问题。大众呢是变成了一个业余的艺术评论家，是谈好看难看。业主呢把房子就当成一张海报，花这么多钱做一张大海报，我还是觉得挺亏的。
就我想问一下问题，就是最近我去看那个，就北京国际设计周那个展览，它有一些新的一些解决城市问题的一些方式，就是提出这个智慧的这个概念，就是把一些城市的一些包括一些数据进行一些统计，然后利用这种视觉化的手段，然后呈现出来。当然，这种视觉化的这种方式可以有多种的开发，比如说一些手机啊、电脑一些开发，然后用一些这种开发的这种程序来解决这个一些这些问题。举个例子，比如说他把这个城市里的所有的出租车进行了 GPS 定位，然后空室的可能是一个颜色，然后别的颜色可能就是载客的可能是一个颜色，然后那个它可能会对这个比如说你有一个手机，然后你想去一个地方，你就可以叫你附近的这个空室的出租车过来，然后接你去另一个地方，它是变成了一种 APP 的这种开发。我想问一下，就是有没有这种可能，就是或者是现在已经有这种可能，就是在欧洲或者是建筑师应该去做更多的事情来完善、来解决这种问题，有没有这种比较好的例子？
I think new technology is extremely important in architecture, but in the end, I would like to kind of say that architects are people that plan space for use, and we're not planning traction devices to that space. But to explain to you what you can do as an architect to create a space that can be used in real time and can be used in virtual life or virtual time, is that you can think about how the perception of that space and the activity of that space can be portrayed outside the physical presence. And then you can start thinking about introducing new media. One of the problems with it currently is that it is simply not all-inclusive. And I think if you are in the end a space planner, it needs to be a space that is all-inclusive for people that can use these devices and for people that cannot. So you can only use it as one ingredient to add to what you're already doing as an architect. So you can use it as a device to attract people that can use these devices or have these devices to come to it or to use it better. But in its routing, it needs to function without it, because if it doesn't, the city would simply be jammed if your battery is empty. And I think that is a thing you need to consider about the smart city concept. A smart city concept cannot work if it's only based on technology. It needs to be mainly based on your mind, because that's in the end the smartest device that is around.
那个我在那个麻省理工学院教书啊，我们那儿做好多这种工作，我就想跟你讲，这种工作非常有意义，建筑师也参与做，可是这个不是建筑师的主业啊，建筑师实际上还是做设计盖房子。
张先生您好，我有一个问题想问您， 这个问题产生也是在刚刚看完您的作品展之后所产生的，在心里。我在看了您早期的作品，从最早的这个人的感受的探索，包括空间句法学的一些探索，到了后期的一个建构的探索，我就想一个问题：是否从最早期的空间句法学的探索到最小的元素，最后一个必然的结果就是关于建筑建构的这方面的探索，节点的探索，是否这样的一个是一个必然的结果？我想看一下您的看法，谢谢。
因为我受的教育哈，因为在中国和美国，然后受教育那段时间呢，就是对这个材料啊、建造啊、等于结构啊，就是都是学的比较少，所以导致了你刚才说那个问题。如果因为今天啊，因为是有好多这个国际的客人就是德国来的嘛，就是在德国、在瑞士，然后在奥地利等等，他们的教育里面呢，其实不是这样子的，等于是跟这个工程方面也好啊，你叫建造方面也好，他实际上学的比较早。所以他们就不会一定有我这样的先后关系，也许是同时，也可能就是关于工程的是可以先学的。我今天觉得中国教育的一个问题，就是关于工程方面呢是学的太少，也学的太晚，所以是导致了今天中国建筑很多那个就问题的原因之一。
Thank you. My question is, as an architect, if you work, you have to fulfill demands or wishes of a client, right? The wishes of the client can be very different, and sometimes the wish maybe is leak of responsibility, or it is inhuman sometimes, or not sustainable. But for me, the question is how you handle this kind of wishes as an architect. Because you can say, no, we don't do it, and then bye-bye, or you try to convince them. How often such kind of requests you have in your offices? That's my question.
The last part is easy. We get this kind of demands every day. That's what we do as architects. I respect the clients very much, but I have to always remember one thing: they aren't architects. They really don't know architecture. So professionally, let's talk about pretty a basic kind of a thing. You have to tell them what are the right things to do, to the point that they would at least understand your position, and then is this endless negotiation between the client and the architect, and we never gave up. But I have to say, once in a while, luckily not very often, they do, and they say, okay, you stick to your principles, so we want to say goodbye, and then that's it.
I think in our practice it's even more than every day. It's like every hour. and I think what is a real asset of being an architect is that you are asked your opinion and they pay you for it. So they, by getting a contract with you, they actually already embed the idea of the fact that they are going to ask you something indecent, because these contracts are always very legal and try to prevent all kinds of instances that they actually want to provoke you to. And then the question is posed, the situation is there. In my instance, although Mr. Ackerman didn't know, I'm Dutch, so my first response is a very Dutch one, and saying simply it's a very indecent question. And then it is about the explanation, or the negotiation as you call it, if you can convince somebody of your own belief, or the belief that the support that you bring to them, and because of the support of the people that in the end are going to use the product you're trying to design, namely the building or the city or whatever. So I think it's if that situation would not exist, an architect is not needed anymore.
沙龙的结束，我首先非常感谢Gianotten先生，和张先生。我原来因为他们两个
要打架，
因为很明显他们的项目是非常不同 ，OMA 和非常建筑的项目有很明显的区别。可是我发现，在一些基本的问题上，好像这个矛盾并不是特别的大。可能这个也会帮助一下，提高一下建筑设计家的权利和影响。我们就准备继续 Mercator Salon， 下一次是什么时候？我们现在还没有定下。我们决定把这个一系列的沙龙叫做谈西谈东，因为我们的题目会是非常宽。可是我希望每一次这个沙龙像今天这么有意思，也这么能吸引你们的注意力。我也非常感谢你们的attention。